Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. My name is Tim Cusick. I'm the WKO product leader. Thank you for letting me know you can hear me right off the bat. You guys are awesome. We're definitely developing a system and a repertoire. Hopefully you'll be able to see my screen also. That way, if I'm talking about things on the screen, it seems like I know what I'm doing. Great. Okay. Wow. Wow, what a big webinar. Got it. Thank you, everybody. Okay, great. Let's jump right in and get started. Today's webinar is on indoor training with WKO5. One quick caveat, and I probably could have been clearer about this. I'm not in the webinar presentation itself going to be talking about what intervals you should do or how you should be working, in the indoor modes. I am going to talk about analytics, how to use WKO5 to get the most out of your indoor data, and then use that data to make decisions. I don't care in the Q&A if you have specific questions, I'll give you my opinion. Just remember, it's my opinion. But I'd be glad to help. I know these are times we're all a little more locked in, I guess, for lack of a better word, and using this time to learn and share ideas is great. So I don't mind staying on in the Q&A and answering whatever I can. But the reality is, I'm going to cover more about data and information. That's me pretty much stalling too, as it looks like we've hit the maximum number, so I'm going to go on. All right, starting off with the standard basic issue of questions. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. I am watching on a side computer screen. I'm sorry, I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in that you might not be hearing me that well. If you're assuming nobody can hear me that well, chances are you're wrong. You might not be able to hear me so well. Okay. I'm seeing complaints for 1 or 2 people, but in the absence of that, I'm going to press on. I'm seeing a lot of people say audio fine. The webinar is full, so there's lots of people. Maybe you're just not hearing. Okay, that extra stall allowed for the last 2 people to get in. Okay, so as we go through today's webinar on indoor analytics and training, please feel free to ask questions as you go. You can open this little control panel, open your question line here, and type in a question where it tells you to. If you type in a question, I am on another screen over here. I try to read the questions as I go. What I don't like doing is coming back a half an hour later and say, oh, you remember that question you had a half an hour ago? It might not be as pertinent. I actually try to blend the answers into the presentation. Sometimes I'll just tell you we're going to get to that later. So please feel free, if you have something that comes up, to ask it. Okay, here we go. Let's start with a simple definition. When we start talking about this idea of indoor training and indoor analytics, we have to think about the idea of sport type, and actually more specifically, sub-sport type. Sorry, it keeps giving all these warning messages that it's full. So we have to understand the idea of sport type and sub-sport type. So sport type you're very familiar with. You've been working in Training Peaks and WKO for a long time. And sport type is, bike, run, swim, row. Those are the sport types that you have. You guys, one of the things, so I'm just going to take a time out and I'm going to start the webinar. The same 2 people are telling me I have audio problems like 10 times. That just fills the question box. And if you're the only person having the audio problem, it's probably on your side, so I can't help or change that. Yes, I know, and a bunch of people, it sounds good to you guys. I have a very good connection. It's probably you. So now, restart. There are so many, this is our largest webinar ever, so it's hard. I get it. There's a lot of people in here. So let's restart. So what we need to do is understand this sport type, bike, run, swim, right? And we've always had that data available to us. But now as the data collection formats have evolved, and so has our training modalities, we have, take running, for example, right? We have running, but in running, we have treadmill, we have trail running, we have track running, we have different types of subcategories in a sport type that we've been trying to tackle for a long time. Think about bike, right? We have biking, and we've always looked at bike as a whole, but there's subcategories like mountain bike, like indoor, that's what we're here to talk about today, and others. So where you're really seeing the further definition, the further sharpening of data is really going, not only having the data available at the sport type, but being able to segment your data into subsport types and then use that data to improve your coaching knowledge, ability, and hopefully, right, the end results. So you're improving your athlete's performance, or if you're self-coached, your own performance. So if we know what a sport type is, bike, run, row, let's talk what the subsport is. A subsport type is a specific and defined subsport type that is a subset of a larger sport type, allowing for more robust and specific analysis. So pretty simple starting point. Now, in defining that, right, what we're going to talk a lot about today is the cycling, because that's where we have, we've brought in subsports and cycling only into WKO5 at this stage. And then we do plan on expanding into running and other sports. First, we had a kind of proof of concept. We've learned a lot about how people want to use subsports and how they don't. And we'll be able to translate that learning into other sports. So just know it is coming to other sports. Right now, though, and today, we're going to talk about bike, right, cycling, and then we're going to talk about subsports, of which we're going to specifically focus on the subsport of indoor. Now, the reality is anything you learn today could be applied to the other subsports like mountain biking or road bike, or however you want to do it. And I will demo that a little bit. Okay, now that we have a definition out of the way, let's talk about how to begin use these subsports. I will demo this in WKO5 at the end, so I'm going to kind of go through the presentation screenshots, but then I'll actually go do it a little bit just to make sure everybody's comfortable with it. So the first thing you need to know is the hero bar has its own settings. You see this little icon right here. When you see a bunch of icons, mountain, indoor, road, if you click on that, you get your sport types. And then if you see a little dark arrow, there's actually subsport types. So this little symbol is all bikes, so you can see the check mark, or at this stage, I can do road bike, mountain bike, indoor bike. We plan on expanding that in the future. Again, this is a proof of concept, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But we will have things like cyclocross or track or some other things at some point down the road. But for now, these are the three we have, and that's how you use them. If you wanted to change it to only be your road bike or mountain bike or indoor bike, you simply select that. This icon will denote which format you're in. So that's how you can control the sport type of your hero bar data. Once you set a specific hero bar data, the data that's underneath here, you can't really see it now, right? But your Pmax and VO2 max and all those things will only be a result of that sport type. So if I check indoor, my Pmax and FTP and things like that will be my indoor Pmax and FTP. So hopefully that's clear and understandable to everybody. The other way that we have that you can edit sport types is we've added the same selection of sport types. You have them down here in the time ranges selection. So any neutral report, neutral meaning it's just like power. It's not bike power, it's not indoor power, it's just power. You control the sport type through the sport type selection. And when we first rolled out sport types, we saw a lot of people make this mistake. We must have received 200 tickets of all my data disappeared. It only reads as zeros. And then you'd basically look at the picture and I'd say, you don't have a sport type selected. So in this, you have this first symbol is all sport types. That just auto selects everything or auto deselects everything. It's all files. That's what the little image looks like. Now, then you have sport types. You'll notice the new ones like mountain bike, indoor. So if you only wanted to see your indoor cycling in all the reports in your dashboard or charts and reports in your dashboard, you would deselect all the others and just have indoor selected. If you want to see just indoor and mountain biking, select those two, that's fine. But that's how it works in that section. Now, that was actually more of a learning curve. A lot of you guys went through that with us, and it took people a while to figure that out, right? We were making a lot of errors. At first, Subsports was such a high demand, and everyone started breaking out reports, and then suddenly you started realizing, wow, there's some good and bad to that. So being able to control it and learn to look through your data sets is pretty important. The other thing it kind of created a challenge that is a feature, right, but it's still a challenge, is now you do have to manage multiple FTPs if you want your Subsport information to do what you want it to do. And that's a statement I'm going to kind of show you a little more on. I'm going to talk about a little later, do what you want it to do, because it really depends on how you're using your Subsports. But the reality is, if you click on your athlete name, you open the metrics line here. These are all the available metrics, whether they're syncing with training peaks, such as weight, or you're selecting them because now you have multiple thresholds, right? Just using power. The same is true for heart rate and pace. You have indoor bike pace or indoor bike threshold power somewhere in here, but I can show it here. You have bike threshold power. So you need to go in and set up your multiple thresholds and manage those thresholds to that setting. That's an important step. I'm going to go a little bit deeper in the demo because it's going to bring up a workflow issue for you later. And it's not an issue. You just have to make a decision on how you want to manage things. But it's important that you make that management. I'm going to stop for two questions, right? Because there's two that are good ones. So one is, does the specific chart selected, indoor PD curve, reflect what is selected, bike and mountain bike, along with the indoor bike? So what Kate is asking is, if the name of the chart is PD curve metrics with indoor cycling, right? Whenever you see, Kate, and everyone, when library charts, when you can also, the third way you can control which data is used is you can build it right in the chart. So this is a basic indoor view, right, as an example, and the PD curve would say indoor view. So that's telling you no matter what you select here, the chart is going to override it and give you the indoor view. And that's important. We made it very flexible for everybody to build their own workflow, but it really depends on how you like to work in it. Whenever we do use a data specific set like indoor, you'll see it in the name, indoor compare, power duration model, indoors. I have some sample things I was working on here, zones, indoor. And so you'll always see when the charts or the dashboards are forced to a data set, it will be named accordingly. So hopefully, Kate, that would answer your question. The next question was, I assume that selecting indoor on the capture device such as Garmin will auto set it in WKO5. That part of your question is correct. So when you get up on your Garmin, you're just training and you're going to use your Garmin file and it has indoor training race as the defaults on a Garmin device. If you select indoor, everything will work automatically. You don't need to make any settings or anything like that. All of these functions, all of these separations will work automatically. The second part of that question is, that said, what about workouts recorded in virtual platforms and uploaded directly from there, such as Zwift? Most virtual platforms denote their file format as indoor. So Zwift does. So everything that comes from Zwift gets noted as indoor. Everything that comes from RGT gets noted as indoor. Most companies do it. Trainer Road was not doing it. I think they might have updated that recently. They weren't marking their files as indoor. As long as the company that you're working with is denoting it in the fit file, WKO will pick it up automatically. And at this stage, pretty much everybody's doing it. So basically, if you're using Zwift and just uploading straight to Training Peaks to WKO, it will show up in your indoor. If you're using your Garmin and your Garmin head unit setting profile is indoor, it'll be automatic. So all of those things will happen. Great. Two great questions. Alan, I see your question. I'm going to answer it. just deleting as I go. Sorry guys, and with these webinars I'm doing here, I want them to be more Q&A. I really want to be able to exchange with everybody, not as formal as some of the bigger, more formal webinars of learning and stuff like that in WKO. So I know that takes a little patience listening to people's questions, but on the same side, I have a feeling you'll learn more as you go. Okay, so I've shown you now how to set multiple FTPs. You realize that you have to set this up because these things will affect things like your training zones, your targets, your intensities, depending on what systems you're using, and it will also affect things like TSS. So, one of the things I want you to think about, and I have a strange chart in the background here too, is we gave you a series of views that do all these things automatically. And we did supply you with an WKO basic indoor view, which is a good starting point. So you can select a view simply by clicking down here. It'll ask you choose an existing view. It'll launch this view selection. Choose view library, and that's the official WKO library. And you'll know one of the selections, or you'll see one of the selections is basic indoor view. You could search by using the word indoor. It'll find it faster. But the reality is that's it. If you double click on that, it will open it. You will see which view you are in up here. And then all of the information in that will be based off of your indoor data. Most of it. There's some comparative data and other stuff as I'll show you, but most of it is based off that. We also have the ability for those more advanced is the reality is you can write all of your own expressions. We've seen a fair amount of questions on expression writing. That being said, I built in a bunch of expressions here for you to get an understanding on some of the core ones if you want it all data, if you want it road data, if you want it indoor data. And the same reality is you just need the Subsport name for mountain bike or any subsport that was available to you. And this is just meant to give you a head start on the actual expression writing yourself. If you want, the reality is you can download this presentation. I put it in the handout section in the little UI to the right, so you can always download this presentation. Be glad to send it to you, or if you weren't able to download it, just email us at info@WKO5.com and we can send it to you. Okay, let's talk about I can't keep up with the questions because there are some people having problems with audio. I don't know if it's me or you. You know, online services right now are super busy. So sorry, it's the best we can do. Now let's talk about the role of subsports in data. The reality is when we think about the core role of the data, right? The reality is you have two areas. You have intensity and time targets, right? Or you have training load. So if you think about it, right, you can have bike as all, when you're talking about intensity and targeting of your workouts and efforts. And I'm going to show you this. So basically we're talking about training zones, right? You can have you can have road, you can have indoor, you can have mountain bike. I didn't do a lot of mountain bike demos since we're talking about indoor, but I think you guys will understand how it works. So really, if you think about the role of Subsport, if you, for a specific reason, want to know specific targeting, where you have a universal bike, but I want to know my indoor versus outdoor ride as a classic example, you can do that. And if you want to run specific zones, eye levels, which I would recommend, or classic zone levels based on a different FTP, again, you can do that. And I'm going to demo how that gets done. But it also affects the training load. So one of the things that people have been confused on, I'm actually going to show a sample of this, a couple of slides, is so indoor rides are based off your indoor FTP. So your TSS, your training stress score, is based off your indoor FTP. Road rides are based off your road ride FTP. The system automatically calculates it. That was a pretty big request from people, right? How do I get the different TSS from those works? We made it automatic based on the FTP settings. But that goes back to the slide I showed you a couple of times ago, a couple of slides ago, where you really have to maintain your multiple FTPs, right? And that reality is if you maintain your Subsport FTPs to what you want, you actually, again, have everything happen magically. And that's what we were going for, so it wouldn't create a lot of angst or confusion. But you do need to understand that if you're going to run multiple subsports, you have to make certain decisions about setting the FTP, which I'm going to go deeper in a moment. And then therefore, that does allow you, if you so desire, a specific training load analysis and analytic. And obviously that could be for things like TSS and time and zone training. But the reality is you need to think about how you want to manage these solutions. So here is an example, right, of training zones. And I'm using some different charts here, and I'm just trying to show example. You should click around in your own stuff. You should click around in your own stuff to make this determination. So the reality is, let's take an example of training targets that I was talking about here. If you look at this athlete, if I look at their regular training zones with road selected, or if I look at their training zones with indoor selected, right here I'm actually using their indoor zones, you can immediately see there's a difference. It's not huge, which is typical, but it could be pretty big. I'm actually seeing some pretty big differences in there for this athlete. And I'm just pulling athletes out of a random data set, sort of. So their indoor outdoor is pretty different. Or you can just use your all. Just say, look, I've got some best outdoor and some best indoor. I'm just going to use my all data. It doesn't take away that you could just use your all data, right? And if you use your all data, I'm going to show you how to manage that in a moment. But the reality is we wanted to give you the option. So if you want your indoor intensity because you're maintaining indoor, great. If you want your outdoor or your road intensity because that's your focus, great. If you want to mix them all together, great. We're not making that determination. We're just going to give you the numbers and ability to do it. So I'm going to go backwards to a slide because I've gotten like 4 or 5 good questions on this. So I'm going to jump back to this slide, right? So let's say you make the determination that you want to manage your outdoor road biking and your indoor bike. I'm just going to ignore mountain bike for the moment, but the same is true if you wanted to do all three, right? But let's just talk about indoor and road. Now, you can, let's say you're testing and doing all the right things, you can maintain a totally unique FTP for those two. So let's say in one, your FTP, my road bike FTP is 300 watts, my indoor FTP is 280 watts. As long as you're setting them and updating, remember, WKO uses your set FTP. We don't force MFTP, even though we think that will be a future upgrade where you can just set it to MFTP. So you have to go in and not only enter your road bike, like I have here, bike threshold power, right? You also have to enter and maintain your indoor bike threshold power. So you need to do both. If you do both, everything works like magic, whether it's your TSS or your classic zones. Now, eye levels will generally work either way, right? Because they're not based on FTP. But the reality is, if it's using the data for the eye levels, it will represent that sport type also. So let's say you do want all those things to work and you do have a difference in your indoor and outdoor, you need to set them differently. But here's what's really important, what I'm about to say. Let's say, screw it, I really generally make the same power and I'm not really sure exactly my difference. I want to use the same FTP for both. And that's 295 watts, right? Let's say I pick something in the middle. All you need to do is set both your indoor and outdoor to 295 and you're fine. Don't overthink it. A lot of people are overthinking that step. And it's like, wow, that is I need to do this, I need to do that. No, if you just want to use your all FTP, just set the same FTP for your indoor and your bike and your mountain bike, and whatever workout you do will be the same TSS, will be the same resulting information. Hopefully that makes sense. That's confused people a lot. It's very simple to just go in and use the same FTP. So I think I just answered a whole lot of questions there. Okay, pressing back in. Now, a way you can test these FTP settings, is open any workout, right? And I actually zoomed in on the workout details page. I'll demo this in a moment for you. So this, you can click on the icon and that changes the sport type. So let's say the indoor sport type was set at like 300 watt FTP. The planned TSS was 195, the athlete gets 208. Well, if you click on that icon and it will drop down and select and change it over to an indoor ride, let's say you had your indoor FTP set at 100 watts, right? I just used to make an extreme example so you can see the difference. You notice that as soon as you click it to an indoor ride, the same workout planned 195 generates 578 TSS. Because clearly with a 100-watt threshold, the athlete killed it, right? Same workout based on the two different FTPs. So you can see how that plays out to some degree just by simply changing the sport type in the details. And I will demo that when we get into kind of the WKO5 side of things. So just know there's a simple, good way for you to check. A lot of people ask, well, what would be the difference? Open the workout and click from one to the other. I will tell you, if you have like a 5 to 10 watt difference in threshold, the difference is often a little less than people think, unless, of course, it's a big, long ride. Shorter the ride, the lower the intensity, the closer they're going to be, as you would assume. So that kind of creates this idea, the challenge of subsports. You know, it's funny, in software, we have this this great catchphrase that Kevin loves because it's so true. You know, fix one problem, create two more. The reality is Subsport gives you a lot of, you know, excellent, vibrant things that you can do, very robust and specific in your analytics, right? But to use it in a way of going forward and setting intensities and targeting and all those things, it does require a little more work. Because the reality of what happens is you go from maintaining the general model to maintaining the models. And what a lot of people are working through, right? What a lot of people are working through is, well, I've done, like I've seen this time and time again, better to say it as an example. I see people who ride their trainer pretty much all month long, and then they're going through some tests. They start testing right after their rest week, and they take their road bike out to do their test because they can get some higher numbers. And I've seen that multiple times. And it's like, well, that kind of defeats the purpose, right, to some degree. If you're doing a lot of training mixed, you know, and you really feel the need to maintain an indoor and an outdoor FTP, it's almost like you have to do two sets of testing. Or you have to come up with other solutions, which I'm going to talk about. But the reality is, if you want both to be precise, you kind of have to maintain both. My recommendation, I'll say this in a couple of slides, is just pick one. Be careful of that over precision, and it really depends on what you're doing in that time frame. What's going to be the dominant process you're working out to? And then I would estimate the difference in the other. Meaning, if I knew my indoor, like I was doing, you know, 9 out of 10, even more, let's say 29 out of 30 workouts indoors because it's the dead of the winter, right? The reality is I'm going to test indoors. I'm going to use my indoor data. Let's say that tells me my FTP is 295 watts. Well, on that one day you go out, you might say, you know, I'm stronger outside. But on that one day when you're not adapted to riding outside, when you're not really, you know, that's not your norm, there probably is no real difference anyway. So the reverse is true. If you're riding outdoor 4 or 5 times, you know, or 29 and 30 times, jumping on your trainer one day, the difference probably is pretty big there indoors because you're not trainer adapted. But the reality is that one day just doesn't matter enough to make you maintain both, right? So pick the one that's the dominant one that you're doing and just use that format for testing, and then translate into other situations, estimate, and use analytics. I'm going to show you some tricks on how to determine that, but use those analytics to figure out the difference. The other thing is, right, and I just had this discussion with somebody, mean maximal power shape becomes an issue. There was somebody who posted a question, and they were looking at their all bike power duration, their modeled FTP, and it was higher than their road bike MFTP and their indoor bike FTP. And at first they couldn't figure out why. Well, we see this about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 times, because what we see out of the indoor and outdoor rider, they ride the short, hard stuff on those couple of days while they're outside. They attack a hill and get a 500-watt 1 minute, which they just don't do indoors. But yet when they're indoors, they get a 90-minute, tempo grind because you're riding indoors and just staying on the power. Well, each one of those curves without the other part of the data suggests FTP is lower. Put them together so you have maximal short from your outdoor and maximal long from your indoor, and that's probably more naturally reflective of the blended two. And I hope that makes sense to people, because that, understanding that is pretty important in that way, because we see that happening, and actually in the end of the day might be the best solution. It really depends on your training goals, as I said, and how you're training and environment, but that might be the best way to do it. But I'll get into those formats in a moment. And then the second is, you have all this precision, right? But ignoring the precision means setting multiple FTPs. So if you just want to mentally turn it off, I don't care what my indoor versus my outdoor versus my mountain bike is, that user is still stuck with the fact they have to go in and enter those multiple FTPs. You still have to go through this exercise. And if you don't, then your TSS will vary, and you don't want that variation. You're just saying, I want 1 FTP, give it to me. So that person who chooses they don't want that specificity, which is cool, and probably about half the people, just set your FTP the same. When you go set your bike FTP, just remember to do your indoor and your mountain bike if you're using those formats, and you'll be fine. Not a great explanation, but a good try for one. So let's talk about those mean max power shapes. Here is an athlete. You see the yellow, red box isn't a great place, but blue is indoor, yellow is road, right? So you're really not, you're basically not even close here. You're seeing wide variation where the road is much stronger in the outdoor, but here you see indoor actually stronger as you get around an hour to an hour and a half. So a classic example of what I just said. This is a MMP outdoor versus indoor comparison model. It's in the WKO basic indoor view under compare. I zoomed it, but it's in indoor compare. So simple view to look at. Here's probably a better, and again, this is in the same WKO basic indoor view, and this is the one I use the most. And it's important to note, I'll say it again in a little bit here, this helps me understand the athlete's history and their current performance. By using their historical performance, you get a lot of insight here. So let's look at example 1 here. Again, WKO5 basic indoor view. You have a 90-day setting. I know I blocked it out here because there was something here I was hiding. So here you see blue is the indoor power duration curve. The last chart was your MMPs. Your red is their bike, so they're all curved. So you see a pretty big gap. This dashed line is measuring the percentage of that gap. So the higher this is, the bigger that gap is in that time range. So you see it pretty positive here. You see it kind of negative here, right? Then I put 2 lines in being indoor and outdoor MFTP, but I annotated them up here. So you see 207 indoor, 236 outdoor. So a pretty big difference. So this example 1, this is the athlete that's classically, they're forced to make some decisions on how they're going to manage their modeled FTP. So do they set indoor, all bike, road and indoor and bike all to 236 or 235 is what I would set in that instance. I always round to 5s, or 240 maybe, even if you round it up. Do they set it all to 240? Or do they use this 207, which they can quickly see they know was probably wrong? The gap is too big, right? Most of you looking at this is like, oh yeah, they're not doing any shorter, harder intervals inside. That's the decision you as the coach or the self-coached athlete needs to make. But looking at this chart, I can give you an example. One of the ways to learn is look at your past 3 or 4 winters where you're doing both, right? And look to see if there's a pattern in your difference in variance. Because if you're going to estimate the difference in your settings, your history probably has a pretty good answer for you. And that's why analytics like this are pretty good analytics. Don't forget, right, the reason we use data, it's not data science. We don't train by data, and data doesn't guarantee success. What you're doing with analytics is creating a better decision-making process. Analytics is a decision science, not a data science. So you're using these analytics to make good decisions. Now I could use Rebecca's historical data for years of it, right? I have years of it and years of her going through transitional seasons or training in the trainer in the winter and stuff like that, right? And this athlete tends to train outdoors way more than on the trainer. But I could look back and make a better educated decision to improve my ability to estimate her FTP indoor, outdoor. Or I could say, I want you to test both and find out exactly. And if I did that at one time frame, then I'd have a pretty good number, which would probably be similar year in and year out. So hopefully that makes sense what I'm saying there. But you're using this data to make a better decision. I have a choice to make with this athlete. Do I run two separate? Do I set her indoor model to 207? I don't think so, right? Because it's all of the short data. So I need to either test her somewhere in the short stuff or make an estimate. That's the decision the coach needs to make. You have the data to make the decision. It's up to you. You have other athletes like Joe Ryder here who really are pretty close, right? It looks like in this 40-second range, there's a pretty big variance, but everything else is pretty flat. And you can see, look how close the indoor and the bike FTP are. Things are pretty close for this athlete. And this is typical of a person, an athlete who is generally blending data or doing all of their workout or almost all of their workouts indoors. So there you see a very close correlation. So no, you're using, I would use 270 as both my bike and my indoor FTP for those. I always round to the 5, and I always round up. I was on a little bit of a challenge. It's just my style. One of the other things you need to look at models, right? And this is more of a forward looking, and then I'm going to kind of get into one more slide, then we'll demo. One of the things I've been playing around, and for those of you that are in our base camp program and our group training program, I've been doing my heat experiments out loud for everybody, where I've been measuring. My trainer I have a separate garage from my house. My trainer is out in that garage. It has been a very cold winter, and there's been a lot of cold days and a couple of warm days. So I've been measuring room temperature. And I've also been testing a device that measures quote unquote skin temperature. I really wouldn't call it skin temperature. I would call it next to skin temperature, but it's something that gives me some new information. I have been then looking at power duration curves indoors, with a fair amount of harder workouts, but no real testing. It's been anecdotal up to this point of how the indoor training environment itself affects us. So everyone here is probably smart enough to know that, indoors, you really have a thermoregulation problem. Even with a reasonable fan, you still have a thermoregulation problem. You're much better at that outdoors than you are indoors. And not always much better. I mean, there's certainly ways you can get it close, but in general, your outdoor thermoregulation is better. So the reality is, indoor training, you think about this difference between my outdoor power and my indoor power, there are lots of different potential causes, whether you're adapted, your biomechanics, your bike fit, your environment, right? Don't forget that as you build charts and think about things in that indoor training, don't be afraid to look at the environmental pieces and parts that could be affecting you. So, just some interesting thoughts there. I don't really have a point to this except, letting you guys consider or think about the idea of don't be afraid to measure environment in that. And as you notice, this person's all FTP, power duration curve is higher than the individual temperature zones. And that's because if you do, like the downside of using, like you ride on Zwift and you upload the file directly, you don't get a temperature capture. So I have a fair amount of files that I don't have, that I wasn't using a testing device. But you can sort of see a pattern, right? And I don't know, I haven't been testing, but I'll tell you what I was doing. But I am definitely stronger when I'm cool. You can see this blue line is when it's not, it says skin temperature, it's a skin temperature measurement, but it doesn't really measure my skin temperature. It's measuring the air right around your skin. But you see cooler, I'm stronger. A fair amount of this data is me. I don't think it's all me, it blends, but this is consistent with my WKO on my Mac where I do all my real data. So when I'm cooler, I'm stronger. As I get hotter, I'm kind of struggling, but definitely cooler, stronger in my garage. This was one of my I did load it. So a couple of people have asked for this chart. This chart, if you sync, right? Sync your WKO, and I added it to the chart library this morning. So you can have it. It's called PD curve by temperature, right? So it's PD curve by temperature. So just use that to look at it. Make sure you have your sport type. There's an indoor one and an all one. So just make sure which one you're using. You might need to pick your sport type. So take a look at it. Pretty good way to understand environment. So another question I get a lot, and I get this, and I've already gotten it a couple of times in this presentation, and then I'm going to go to Q&A and demo you guys. Sorry, I was off to a rough start. There's a lot of technical difficulties. I mean, this is literally the biggest webinar I've ever seen, and I think GoToWebinar is struggling under it a little bit. It took me a little to get settled in and catch my stride there. So a lot of people ask me about, Tim, what about testing, right? What should I do about testing? And I want to maintain my indoor model and my outdoor model. If you go back to what I showed about webinar 4 weeks ago, I think I did it about maintaining your power duration curve. One of the things I pointed out is people are getting in the habit of over-testing because they're chasing every little bump in the curve. Another reason people are getting into over-testing, you really should not be testing more than your short, medium, long every 4 to 6 weeks. I've kind of gotten in the habit of doing it 4 weeks because the unstructured format is making it so easy for me and my athletes, but I have a unique athlete set. If I was, if I just think as me as a coach, as a policy, and again, this or a procedure, this is my opinion, I wouldn't do more than 4 separate tests in a 4 to 6 week period. And why I say that, right, is you might do 3 of them indoor because that's your dominant indoor, but still test something outdoor to see if you've got a little more outdoor, a little more power. But the reality is I would try to keep it to 3 tests under one format, indoor, outdoor, every 4 to 6 weeks. Again, I like 4 in that function, but whatever you think. But when people ask me, should I test indoor, should I test outdoor? I have the same answer, right? One, you have a lot of history. Look back at your history first, and I showed you comparative charts already, and see, do you historically have a big gap? And the time you really want to look for your gap is transitionary periods, like April, right? Where you're still doing some pretty good hard indoor rides, and you might be doing some first group rides in a normal year, sorry. Some new outdoor rides, right? And you have a mix of data. Even in September, October, in November, we're riding later and later into the fall, and kind of like November, depends where you live, October, right? You're crossing over while you're still pretty fit from outdoor to indoor. Look at those time frames historically and ask yourself, do I have a big gap? Is there really a large percentage when I'm somewhat fit between my indoor and outdoor? If the answer is no, then I would give you an easy solution. If the answer is yes, I would give you an easy solution, which I'm about to give you, right? And if the answer is I don't know, well, there's not an easy solution. We'll talk about that too. So let's say the answer is yes, right? Like you really have a pretty small gap. I would only test the main training format. So let's say you're kicking off the season in November, and that athlete, from November to April is going to be stuck indoors 99% of the time. Do your baseline testing right off the bat indoors, right? Do your base, and let's say that happens the first week of December, do that indoors. But what I would do, right, and that's probably 60% of athletes training, in the quote unquote north where there's winter. They fit within that realm one way or another. So here's a trick, write this note down, right? What I do with that same athlete that I would know, I don't have any athletes that get that stuck indoors except me. I'm an N of 1 for that. But the reality is what I do then is I also do a baseline test at the end of my outdoor season in like October. I mean, like most of us, right? And most of you guys, you're riding your bike all year long. And even your rest break is what, 2 weeks? You know what I mean? You're a week, 2 weeks. So you're not losing that much fitness. But if I know I'm closing out the 2019 season, last thing I do is a baseline test. So I know where I was at the end of the season, and assuming some reasonable fitness, I'm probably not in peak form in the summer, but I'm probably pretty fit, right? And then when I do my indoor baseline of December 1, I actually have some pretty cool comparative data. I haven't lost that much fitness, assuming I've ridden some in between, maybe taken a week or two off. When I do my baseline testing, then I know. But my baseline testing for the new season is in the dominant format. So if I'm going to be doing 80% of my workouts indoors, just do your baseline testing indoors, run all your zones and targets off your indoor data. And for those a couple of outdoor data days, use the decision information you have to set FTP to appropriately represent TSS or intensity targets. Do the art side of it. If 90% of your rides are outdoors with occasional indoors, absolutely just test outdoor, right? And use those numbers and adjust any indoor work as you have to do based on your historical comparative data. And that's where those two baselines will give you insight. Now, what happens when you're like a weird mix? That gets really tough to me. And that's where the art of a great coach comes in. And I think a lot of self-coached athletes underappreciate the value of a coach, because there you're kind of stuck in the middle. To be honest with you, I was going to say you're kind of screwed, but I'm trying to say it nicely, because you're going to have to either test twice as much to maintain both, which I'm not a big fan of. Too much testing becomes too much effort, too much load, potentially, unless well managed by a very skillful coach. Not that a self-coached athlete couldn't do it, but a lot of times the self-coached athlete lacks self-perception. It needs somebody looking at you, to give you that perception. Or you really have to be smart about using your historical data, your comparative information, to make quality predictive differences so that you're maximizing your training through both. And there's where, it's hard to say, guys, here's a perfect chart or here's a perfect science, because that's really where the art comes in. If you say, hey, 90% plus is indoor, bam, I can give you good science. Say 90% is outdoor, bam, can give you good science. You have a 50-50 blend. There's science there to support you, but that's really where the coach artist has to just do it right. Wish I had a better answer. So I test the main format. I use the blended model for TSS, meaning I'll go in and set FTP based on their historical comparative data. Indoor FTP is 290. Typically on form, they do 5 more watts outdoors typically. So I'll set their outdoor FTP at 295. So anytime they ride outdoor, whatever, it might be a little more reflective. You guys, I can tell you the 5 watts at FTP is going to make a very marginal difference at TSS, but I do it to keep accuracy in my thinking, not accuracy in my TSS. I want to always have a good history. I want to remember what I was doing at that time frame. And that's how I blend it. I blend for targeting. So if they're riding indoors, 29 straight days and 30 days is Indian summer and they can get out, I might say, yeah, I'm looking at the comparative. I'm going to say, hey, knock 10 watts off everything. And I'm just going to use the art form to do it. But in all of my Subsport analytics, I absolutely use the Subsport. So what I mean is, if I want to go out and see somebody's mean maximal 20 for the last minutes or their top 10 for the last 3 years, right? I want to look at indoor compared to outdoor. For people who have overlap in their training, I want to look at all of my analytics. To me, the place where the power of the Subsport is, right? Everyone's getting pretty comfortable targeting with Subsports. Now, everything I just said makes sense to you guys. I have a feeling no one's going, wow, I didn't fully understand that. I mean, there might be some elements of how I do it, but you get the idea. But where the real value is being able to do the analytics of the athlete performing in these subsets to make better guided decisions on how you can better understand how the athlete performs in that environment so that you can dictate better training stimuli in the name of getting better result. And that's where the art of it all really comes in. I'm trying to give data analytic examples here and how to manage these different subsports. To learn how to use them, you have to be willing to begin to experiment with some of the learning that we're giving you here in WKO5. And we're not giving you learning. I'm not necessarily teaching you how to be a better coach. What we are giving you is access to these analytics where you can see, wow, I mean, I have some athletes who just have big gaps. Me. I'm like the worst. I don't know. I'm like, as a coach, if you guys, any one of you had to coach me, you would die. Scott Moniger calls me uncoachable because I'm that guy. I have like every problem. I'm way stronger outside than I am on the trainer. Even if I ride the trainer all winter long, my difference is like 15 watts. I just have some strange biomechanics. I don't adapt to a trainer very well. I've tried everything like rocker plates and this and that to balance it out, and I'm still just bad. It's just don't do as I say, not as I do, right? So you got to learn to deal with all that. But the data has really helped me figure it out. I'll tell you one of the things in doing this temperature testing that has been new to me this year. I am way more temperature sensitive indoors than I thought. And that's actually been some breakthroughs. So I've been doing cold, like literally leaving my garage door open to make it colder before I start. And I train stronger when that happens. And I wouldn't have learned that if I wasn't looking at the data. I always knew I was a reasonable sweater. I'm like one of those guys who is chilly if it's a little bit cold, and then as soon as I'm warm, I'm heavy sweating, right? And now I've learned that, wow, that's impacting me indoors, but it was only the ability to look at the subset data of indoors, because if I look at it all mixed, it doesn't look that different. But when I'm indoors, it's a bigger issue. So the reality is, right, that's how you use these analytics. You have to spend the time looking at the data, learning about the athlete's physiology, and then using that education about, or using their physiology or your knowledge of their physiology to better train the athlete. That's the whole goal here. So all of that presentation in analytics was to get everybody more comfortable going in and exploring with subsports, starting to use them more and do some unique learning. So I'm going to go to Q&A in a minute. Well, actually, I'm going to go to Q&A now, and I'm going to do a bunch of questions real quick, and then I'm going to demo. So a question I had is, if I don't have indoor FTP set, does it default to all? No. So any FTP always defaults to 250 watts. So it's the average of the database. That's why we picked 250 watts. The average person has a 250 watt threshold out of thousands and thousands of people, right? And they could be heavy, light, whatever, male, female. It's just 250 watts. So it does not default to anything except the default. So 250, like it'll look, you can see right here in this screenshot, it says, right, default 250. What I do my screen images on is not my working WKO. So you see that default, and it'll always default to 250. So just make sure you understand that. Somebody asked how to build dashboards and charts. There is a tremendous amount of education. If you want to learn how to build dashboards and charts, right, click this little question mark right up here and look at the Education Center. That takes you to the help website. There's great information there. Yes, there is an FTP for both, meaning you have to set both FTPs. That's what I've been saying. And some of these questions are old. There was too many coming in that I could not keep up with. Okay, answered. So Dave, there's a good question. I'll tackle that one. So Dave asks, in my experience, a high inertia trainer ovulates the need for separate indoor-outdoor work. But the only thing I don't do on the trainer rollers is all-out sprint. Is this common? Yeah, Dave, I think what you're seeing in what Dave is calling high inertia, large flywheel type of trainers, in the name of getting better road feel, right? Flywheels are getting bigger and heavier and more. Technically, they're able to contain more kinetic energy. They feel more like the road, and you pedal more naturally, and your power is actually closer. So for me, and I have years of testing on this, so I'll only give you my answer. And you guys, I'm going to demo, so I don't want to slow everybody down too much, but I just want to get these first group of questions done. So the reality is, way back in the fluid trainer days, then I had CompuTrainer, then I had a Tax Neo, Wahoo, and now I use the Hammer H3. The bigger the flywheel, which the Hammer H3 is the best one, the more natural it is, the more natural the pedaling feel gets, the closer and closer I get to indoor and outdoor power. So that's been my N of 1 experience, but I would think a fair amount of people would agree with me. All right, let me get into the demo, then I'll pick up. Those are the old questions. I see new ones coming in, I'm going to get them in a moment. So let me go to the demo. So here I have WKO5. I am still running the same. As a matter of fact, I went back to a different test build. You remember I was on 558 last time. Now I'm on 556. So if you see something weird, sorry. It could crash in my presentation because we are testing some different stuff. So I need to get the right 555 on this. So I am in the WKO5 basic indoor view. Here's a quick trick. Like if you're flipping back and forth between indoor and outdoor, if you actually just click on the word, you get your most recently used views. So you can click very quickly back and forth from indoor to outdoor and things like that. So just a little tip. Here is the sport type. You'll notice it highlights when I hover over it, right? If I click on it, it gives me my sport and there's my subsport. So if I look at all sports, my MFTP is 267. If I just looked at my road bike, it's 257. So you can see it immediately updates. This data is now based on my road bike. So that tells you I've probably been doing longer, harder efforts on the trainer than I've been doing on the road bike. And you could always just switch it back, to all bike and stuff like that, and it works there. You do have run and walk as subsports. We will be looking at some additional subsports in the main categories here. So just know they're coming. Okay. Now, since I'm on an indoor effort, Kate had asked this, and in my personal ones, I turned this gray, by the way. That's why you saw it look a little different in the slide. But even if I take away indoor training, somebody deselect, see I'm hovering over the trainer, and I deselect it. So it does. So that chart is in the indoor, a bad example. And the reality is everything goes blank because I took away the indoor information, right? So if I put it back, it's all back. Now, if I take out road bike, it's still there. So it is using the type written that way. I should have checked that before I answered that question, Kate. But you can then select, sport types. You see how that affects your charts. So that's how you affect it in time ranges. It's a simple example as that. So the reality is you have the view, you have the setting, and you have the sport types here. Now, if you click on the athlete's name, right, and you can see here I have bike FTP at 400 watts, which, I'm probably 400 watts. Funny thing is, this is some of my data. I'd be happy to be 267. So it's somebody else's stronger data. The reality is you have to go find, so the indoor bike threshold is set at 150. I went in and reset them for this demo at 150. So see, the default is normally 250. I set it down to 150, right? And then I could find and that's my indoor, and my bike threshold, which is right here. I went ahead and there's your default 250, but I've marked all the other time frames and I added these to show you every time. To add a time frame, you just hit the plus button. If you hit plus, it'll add a time frame, right? So I have a new entry here and it's ready to go. Now it might not be 400. I could edit that to be 410 or something, but I'm just going to leave it be for the moment. So now if I go into my workouts and I find an indoor workout, here's the SST, or here's the VO2 max workout that somebody did. I guarantee it wasn't me because, well, it's 2017, so maybe, who knows. So the reality is the planned TSS was 195. Indoor bike, because the FTP is set at 150, is 578 TSS. But if I click on this, go to bike, and switch it back to road bike, it automatically calculates the TSS back to 208 based on that FTP. So what that really good news is, right, that's doing everything automatically for you. As long as you maintain those two FTPs, everything will work as you want it. You just have to make a decision of what you want to enter. Do you want the same number in both, or do you want the unique number in both? But you do have to enter them as a threshold setting and maintain that. So if their threshold changes every couple of weeks, you have to change both every couple of weeks, right? That's all it takes. Everything else will be magic. Your TSS will be based off those FTPs. It will know if you're indoor, outdoor, as long as you set it indoor in your Garmin and you're using, Swift and functions that do Trainer Road and all the companies that do mark their files. Everything is great. So that should all be automagic. And it's pretty much that easy. Now, another way to tell, when I originally selected this workout, right, it was a trainer workout. Notice how it's showing me my trainer hero bar data only. So I can compare. So let's say here I go to this road ride. Notice this is a road ride. Notice the icon. Notice the icon. Now it's showing me my road data in the hero bar. So what happens at the workout level is the hero bar auto adjusts to your road specific data. Just so you can get a quick view, right, of how that compares. When you close the workout, it goes back to whatever your setting was at the athlete level. That's a pretty good understanding of the function and flow. So I'm going to go back to questions right now, and I'm just going to answer top down. So, and feel free to apply them in. If you guys are, if I bored you to death, sorry, that was a rough start. That was a lot of technical difficulty. I got to keep practicing my webinar game. I've actually been doing too much talking on the internet, like I'm sure most of us have been. But I'm going to go into deeper Q&A. If you don't want to listen, feel free to drop off. Totally understood. I will post the recorded version in about an hour or two up online. Okay, will Training Peaks get the upgrade to Subsports so that we can track TSS there as well as to allow athletes to change workouts and things there? Dave, I know it's on their list, but I'm not sure of any schedule. And as you can imagine, things are a little disrupted right now, so I don't know if its overall impact on the bigger development schedule. But always remember that the WKO product is the leader, and it's where we test our innovations, right? So once we kind of get them vetted and working well in WKO, they tend to trickle down into Training Peaks. But again, I commit to no date or anything. Those aren't my decisions to be made. Alan asks, can we use the same filter out track, treadmill, outdoor running paces? Alan, we need to add the specific subsports you're talking about, like track, treadmill, outdoor. But there is, if you noticed, if anybody was paying really close attention, there is other. So you can at least pick up one. Like let's say you know that you have track and you always want to set it to other. You can do it. It just won't be named track. It'll be named other, right? But all you need to do is set your other threshold. That being said, it is in our, we are going to add more subsports. The reason we slowed subsports down is it confused people a lot in the beginning. My data's gone. The number of tickets we got, my data's gone because people weren't clicking on the subsport was high. Now that everybody's adapting and seeming to get it, we probably can get back to that activity. So yeah, you could use the other sport right now, but we've got better solutions coming. David, you asked, can you use run power to establish run FTP in training zones, eye levels? Of course. If you were to use running, though, you might want to use the running dashboards. So they're all set up for running, like the running views, I'm sorry. I don't actually have one in here, at least in my recently used. So if I go to choose an existing dashboard, I go to chart library, view library. You'll see basic run view with pace and heart rate, basic run view, that one's power. So the data's there, just load it up and make it work. It all works. All right, next question. If a cyclist doesn't have training over 1 hour, can they have issues with the PD curve? Dave, that's a great question. The answer is yes. You at least need 30 minutes to generate a power duration curve. It needs a certain amount of data to work. And even that, you know, between 30 and an hour, it can be pretty tricky. If you look in the basic or advanced view in the power duration model, if you look at the power duration model 1, there is a power duration model with, here it is right here, with error checks, with error calculations, right? You want these numbers to be under 3%. Anything under 3% is a pretty good model. As you start to get close to 5, the CV numbers, the percentages, that means the plus minus. You know, it's giving a percentage number, the plus minus. But it does okay, but really under an hour, it's kind of hard to use the model. It'll still be okay, just know, and you can check at its variation. Can I find the graph PD curves versus temps? Yes, I pushed that graph up into the chart library. So there is no importance of FTP settings in Training Peaks free account as WKO calculates TSS per internal. Yes. So we've had this discussion a fair amount online, right? In your trainingpeaks.com account, it does not store your athlete's FTP. You can't look back at the historical FTP of an athlete in Training Peaks. It's just not stored that way. It's actually stored in each individual file. That's just a legacy issue. It's technology debt. It was done that way years ago because we saw a different path forward. Unfortunately, now that's a little bit of a barrier from us syncing FTP between the two. I'd love to give you guys a fancy answer, but that's at least the honest one. So you have to set your FTP. WKO FTP is totally standalone. The beauty there, in my opinion, is you have the ability here to do the subsports and maintain the things you want. So you want to set it anyway. So you do have to set it uniquely in WKO. How do you calculate FTPs at different altitudes, for example? Pablo, altitude, I actually did a webinar on altitude. If you email me at info@wko5.com, I'll share it with you, or you can find it in the playlist. We have an altitude correction capability, and there's actually a dashboard called altitude adjusted or something like that. If you just search the dashboards for altitude, you'll see all kinds of analytics of how we do it. And there's an already existing webinar on that you could either find or just email us and I'll send you the link. Do we think Training Peaks will include the indoor-outdoor bike? I've sort of answered that. I know it's on their list and desire. I don't know when they're going to get to it and not something in my control. Is it possible to change Celsius to PD temperature? Yeah, Ivan, it should just work. I think if you look at the expression, it'll use English temperature, but if you override it, like if your system is set to metric, it will just simply override it and make it metric. I haven't tested that, to be honest with you, but let me know if it works, but I'm 95% sure it'll work. So it'll automatically just convert for you. All right, James, how does indoor versus outdoor heart rate equate to your outdoor? I feel the same. Yeah. You know, James, I've never really found a direct correlation over time. How you doing, by the way? Good to see you. I've never really found a great correlation over time because my heart rate varies a lot in indoor training, and it really depends on my ability to keep up on hydration and other things. What I do find, and I know this will sound a little odd, is my heart rate is more reactive to my overall fatigue, meaning when I'm really fresh, my heart rate is super hyper. When I'm I wouldn't call it chronic fatigue, but when I'm fatigued like more than 7 days kind of workout rolling, I would call it acute fatigue, but not just one day. Sometimes when you say acute, somebody thinks you mean one day. My heart rate begins to suppress. It really suppresses when I'm sitting in a lot of indoor, but I can't put a specific number to it because I really think, the temperature issue, I don't think, I just don't thermoregulate well. I don't have a big range of thermoregulation. So it's hyper responsive to whatever's happening with the temp, more so than my heart rate responds to. Hope that makes sense. Do I think Zwift is a good application for indoor training? I think there's a lot of good indoor trainings. If you wanted, here's my recommendation. I always get in trouble for doing this, but that's okay. If you want pure training, Trainer Road is the best. Like if you don't care about the entertainment and the icon, your avatar rolling around, things like that, Trainer Road is the best. If you want a good blend of training and entertainment, Zwift is the best. If you want realism and good rides and training, the old classic erg video is the best. Erg video has the best erg function out there. The founder is basically the guy who designed it, the whole erg function that everybody uses. And their function is the best. If you want cool graphics and pretty views, RGT, which is new and still kind of coming out of beta, they're doing some really good work in that direction. So it really depends on what floats your boat and what you like. And there's plenty of other options out there like Rovi, and they're doing some great work and new stuff, and plenty of groups coming. Assuming you don't have a Garmin, how do you mark a ride indoor or outdoor? I don't fully understand the question. I know Mark has left. He'll ask me. How do you measure the temperature? Raul, I can't tell you. I have a device. It's actually been around for a while, but people are doing some upgrade work on it and looking for some metrics. I will tell you in about 30 days. How's that, if you remember to ask me? But I also do compare it to my average Garmin device, which that report is, what the report I shared with everybody is average room temperature. The reason I wrote the report originally, though, was I was measuring the quote-unquote skin temperature. I just knew you guys wouldn't have that data. It's a device that's going to do an upgrade and start to become more relevant again. It's a device that firefighters and things like that use. As a little hint. If you searched around a bit, you could find it. Can I demonstrate how to find the PD curve by temperature? It's not coming into my library. All right, Pablo, if you don't see it in your library, right, you haven't completed a full sync. So just close your WKO5, right, and then open it. That will tell WKO5 to reach out and look for new charts. You know, that little thing that says uptype synchronize, it says a couple of messages if you read it. The first thing it does is looks at the chart library. And then if you wanted the chart, right, just look in any dashboard, add an existing chart. So click add an existing chart, go to the chart library and search temperature. So if I just look at temp, so there's average temp versus MMP, EF by temps. See, I don't even have it in mind because oh, there it is, PD curve by temperature. So it's definitely been uploaded. So once you close and open your WKO or trigger a sync, it will be in there. It just hasn't uploaded to your system yet. Close that before I forget. Do you recommend doing indoor FTP tests to set indoor FTP and outdoor FTP? Robert, I do not recommend doing indoor FTP tests at all. And it's funny, I got in this discussion on Facebook the other day. I personally, just knowing your FTP isn't enough information. You want to use eye levels and more specific targeting. You want to do the structured testing targeting I put out as a system. Click the question mark. That launches the WKO5 help section, right? Go to the Education Center. Go to Coach and Train with WKO. Go to the process. And there's a step-by-step process where step one is how to do all the right testing for indoor training, right? Just measuring your FTP isn't good enough. You really need all of the metrics. You need to look at what your short and your long stuff is. FTP is just one measuring stick that everyone has gotten overly focused on. And if you're only training to FTP, you're missing something. Now, don't get me wrong. It's the same yardstick you've been using probably for 15 years, right? So if you wanted to know your FTP, absolutely go out and measure FTP. But if you want to use it as the determinant of your training intensities, you're leaving a lot of individualization on the table. And there's a webinar, it's in this education center called Individualizing Your Training. Watch that webinar. What does SS stand for in the PD curve with sum of squares? It's just a mathematical check system. Okay. Can you demo how I would determine the difference in power output from the indoor smart trainer versus power meter on an outside ride? Sure, yeah, I mean, it was the chart we were looking at. So if you go to indoor view, right, there's a chart set here called indoor compare. Click indoor compare, and it's right there for you, right? So you see these different charts, including the temperature one I put in there. So you can see all of the charts in there. Now mine was a little more specialized. I added like FTP and differences and variances. Maybe I can share that one. I probably should have done that for you guys. I had a variance percentage, if you noticed in mine. I will ask Debbie if she can add it to this view here shortly. But that's all you need to do. You can look at the difference. Like this athlete is very similar, right? Okay, this is me, sort of, like I said, my percentage difference indoor versus outdoor. Oh, the percentage is there. It's just the chart line. See the percentage here? So you can see the percentage at any given time in the gray. That's all you really need to do. Gives you good insight into how to understand. And then, if you need to drill deeper or learn more, you can start to figure out. And it's in these chart sets. Hopefully that's the answer you were looking for. Cool. I think I cleared all the questions. Again, sorry, getting off to the rough start. The technology threw me off, but hopefully we got into some good information and some great questions. Anybody has anything else you want to know, please feel free to post it in Facebook. I will get this recorded webinar up soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.